911 operators, what call scares you to this day? Former 911 operator here. Sometimes the calls that stick with you aren't the most physically traumatic. I once had a call from a 17-year-old kid who came home from a sleepover to find that his mother had moved. Just picked up his sister and everything in the house and left while he was gone with no forwarding address or information. She also turned off his cell phone that morning, so literally the only number he could call was 911. He was trying so hard not to cry and his voice was shaking as he kept apologizing to me for calling 911. He just didn't know what else to do and had no other family. She also took everything, so all he had was a couple of things that he had taken to the friend's house. He told me his 18th birthday was in a couple of weeks and he literally had nothing. The officers that responded took him to a shelter. I think about him often and I hope he's okay. Even if he was a kid who got in trouble or had behavioral issues, I can't imagine coming to find your mother has absolutely abandoned you. How on earth could a mother do that to her child? God, that poor kid. I took a call from a female during this pandemic saying, "My husband won't let me see the children." So immediately I'm thinking this is a custody dispute and not really a police issue, but my gut said there was something here, so I poked around a bit and asked some more questions. I asked her if she was allowed legally to see the children and how he was stopping her, and she simply told me, "He closes the curtains or locks the doors." Huh? Okay, so you live separately. When are you supposed to see them? No, we live together. Now honestly, I was very confused. He closes the curtains in your own house? How does that work? So I asked more questions, and it transpires that this woman was being forced to live in her garage by her husband. He locked her in there for most of the day. She had no hot water, only cold running water, and no toilet. She was peeing in the sink and crapping into plastic carrier bags and piling them in the corner. Her husband visited her once a day with a lovely family meal, but she only got this meal if she did what wives are supposed to do for their husbands. And when she refused, he made her stand naked in the garden for 12 hours. It was probably 6 or 7 degrees Celsius at this time. She had no heating, but he lets me have the blanket off the bed. And this had been going on for 3 months. This poor woman genuinely didn't believe any of this was a problem, and she was simply calling me because she was upset that when she had misbehaved on purpose in order to be in the garden for 12 hours naked so she could see her children through the window, he had closed the curtains. It just absolutely floors me that in this modern world and in the UK where we teach women they can be whatever they want and encourage equality, there are still women who think this is a normal life. I hope she is doing well now. Former 911 operator/dispatcher. I only did the job for a few months, but there are 2 calls that stick with me. Call number 1, 911 terminal goes off and I answer. On the other end of the line, there a woman screams, "He's R-ing me, please help." I ask her that she's just been R'd. At most, people tend to report crimes as if they are just happening when most of the time crime has already occurred and finished. She screams, "No, he's R-ing me now." This woman is actively being R'd while on the phone. We get police dispatched and try to locate her, but her phone is pinging in the middle of a cornfield, and she's saying she's in an alley. Finally, after 10 minutes of listening to this woman being attacked, she gets away and gets to a house where we locate her. Her attacker got away. Call number 2. Due to a batch of heroin that was heavily laced with fentanyl coming out of Ohio, southern Indiana had one of the worst nights of overdoses. Narcan was scarce. For 8 hours, we fielded an overdose call at least every 30 minutes. The one that broke me, though, came near the end of the shift. 911 terminal goes off, and I answer. On the other end, a 10-year-old boy states that his father is not breathing and turning blue. I ask if his dad was eating something or did he suddenly collapse, etc. The boy states his dad has a needle in his arm and he thinks his medicine is bad. I get the boy to unlock his door and the medical team and police arrive. Later, the officer who arrived let me know the dad didn't make it. I cannot tell you how horrible it is to listen to a child as they watch their parent overdose and die. To those of you thin yellow line workers still working the phone lines, thank you for being the voice on the other end of the line. The calls from kids, that would just break me. Just reading these stories is making me feel like I'll have nightmares about it, but to have to be a person who has to be strong enough to help those kids sounds Herculean at the very least. I work as a 911 operator now, and I have to say it's the calls we get every day that are seemingly dealt with in a sort of fashion you would expect. Domestic, police and EMS sent, and the situation was taken care of. That sort of thing we get all the time. One time we got a routine call, reckless driver passing people going way too fast. Pretty normal stuff in a small county. As I'm dispatching police to head over near the location, I get another one saying he is wrecked and that the car is on fire and he is trapped. Taking a call I've done thousands of times, but for this one, to turn bad in the worst way. I could hear the man screaming as he burned alive. Fire and EMS couldn't get there in time, and makes me feel like I could have possibly been faster. But the man burned in less than 12 minutes. Also, he had just beaten his girlfriend before this, so haven't lost sleep over it, but sure is a hell of a way to go. I'm a former 911 operator. There are a few that still get me sometimes, but only after thinking about them for a while. 1. They played us a message in training and it hit like a punch to the gut because of our inexperience. The woman had called 911 because her son had a knife and was threatening her. He ended up coming after her before she could tell us where she was, but in order for her to stay on the line with us, she threw her phone. The son slit her throat and we had to listen to her die for an obscene amount of time while the police headed to the location that the system gave us. Afterward, when the cops showed up, he ran at them with the knife and they shot, so we got to hear him die as well. Ever heard agonal respirations? You don't want to. 2. The one that still gets me from when I was in the room is a call that a coworker took right next to me. He was usually laid back and jovial, super easygoing. Everyone knew something messed up had happened when he sat up and started working more intensely than we'd ever seen him. After the call was complete, he went to our supervisor and asked for the rest of the night off. Turns out the call he got was a woman screaming because she went to check on her 9-year-old child and found the kid hanging in the closet. They'd hung themselves because of bullying. That was the most shaken any of us had been in a long time. The room was so quiet while it played out. 3. I took a call from a woman who told me her ex said he was going to kill her and her young children. They'd fled their house on foot, but his truck was circling them. Before I could get her to calm down and give me her location, she started to scream and the phone clattered to the ground. A moment later, a little girl picked up and said hello. She told me her mom was just sad, not hurt. I tried for a location, but she couldn't read to tell me the names of the buildings nearby. Before I could try for descriptions, she said, "Mommy is better now," and hung up. I called again and again, and after about 30 calls, the little girl answered the phone. She sounded like she was in a car. I identified myself and asked where she was. All she told me was, "I'm not allowed to talk to you." The caller was unable to be located, and I never heard from them again. There was also a couple of miscellaneous stabbings, domestic violence issues, attempted self-terminations, and murders that I'd taken while I was there. Also, a few school shooting threats and domestic terrorism threats. At one point, my own boss went missing on my birthday, and his body was only very recently found. Every day was something new. About 10 years ago, I had to do a court-mandated class at a coroner's office. In this class, they had a recording of a 911 call placed by a lady whose husband had gotten so drunk he didn't recognize his own wife in their home, so he grabbed a knife thinking she was an intruder. Despite her pleading with him and calling his name, he ended up stabbing her to death. I want to say over 30 stab wounds. Her screams and begging her husband to remember were gut-wrenching. Eventually, she stopped making any kind of sound, and you can hear their young daughter come out of her room and call out to her, only to be met with silence. It's then you can tell the woman is no longer breathing. I will hear those screams and begging until the day I die. A woman called 911 screaming bloody murder, wasn't specifying at all what had happened. We sent all the services, standard behavior for something we feel is a priority but can't distinguish which one. Immediately, while I sat on the phone with her screaming in my ear. Nothing I said made her respond to my questioning, and her screams never changed, and there was no background noise to figure it out. Turns out her 4-month-old had died from SIDS. If for some reason I had ever got it in my head to try to tackle being a dispatcher, that right there would be the call that would have got me to turn in my notice. Just the feeling of helplessness when talking to people in the worst moments of their life would be just too much. Former dispatcher here when I was 22, now 27. I've got 2. One was a call I heard in training. We were listening to a lot of famous and hopeless 911 calls that were particularly grave in nature. The trainer was trying to familiarize us with the concept of hearing tough things over the phone once we were done with classes. Well, she runs out for a second because a dispatcher on the phone busts out of her room crying. She comes back in about 15 minutes later with a tape, a call that just came in. Basically, a toddler found his dad's gun and accidentally killed himself. The mother called it in. She's crying and screaming and just keeps saying "my baby" over and over again. In the background, the police have the father surrounded because he has the gun to himself. A few seconds pass and you hear an audible shot on the phone. The father couldn't live with himself and committed self-termination. It was extremely tough to commit to the job after that, but I did. I'll never forget the way that woman screamed as her whole world collapsed in on itself. The second was one of my first calls after training. I answered the phone and a young kid said he wanted to report a murder. Nervous, I continued to ask him directions and he gave me an address. Basically, he said he was playing video games at a friend's house and someone he knew there killed his girlfriend and left her tied to the bed. He gives me the address and I send the call over to our dispatchers. 15 minutes or so pass and there's a structure fire at the same house. The boyfriend lit the house on fire after he killed his girlfriend. I stayed for about 7 more months and decided the job wasn't losing sleep over anymore. At 22, I thought I could use the money, but it wasn't worth the depression and alcoholism that followed. Not 911, but did distress marine radio in Alaska back before dangerous catch was a thing. I worked many interesting cases involving serious incidents. The worst were the man overboard, since they had at most 5 minutes to get them back aboard. One case I remember was that a member of the crew went down to the engine room and one of the guys was lying on the deck. They started CPR and called me on the HF radio. I patched in the duty flight surgeon so they could walk them through the CPR, but after 20 minutes, they were told they could stop. No one knew how long he had been down. The crew continued CPR for another 40 minutes before giving up. The rescue was not possible as they were 400 miles from the nearest helicopter. Alaskan waters are a large and lonely place. The remainder of the call was filled with instructions from the Alaska State Troopers on what to do with the body, as they were at least 4 days from home port. The scary part for me was how isolated those guys are when they are out there. I remember being so excited to become a dispatcher. The classes, the comradeship with other dispatch and police, helping people in need, I was so excited. The first night I worked, after all the training, I listened in while the woman who worked there for years answered the line so I could get a feel for a call. It was someone absolutely frantic yelling to get an ambulance to their house now. They went on and on without actually providing an address, just yelling at us, asking why we weren't helping. As frantic and fast as they were going, they just stopped. The woman working dispatch kept asking if they were still there because it had become so quiet, and the person in the line, in the saddest, most deflated way, just says, "Never mind." The woman training me was all but filing her nails. This was so commonplace for her. Apparently, 2 of our on-duty were able to get to the person's house, and nobody ever told me what happened. I was only there for that one training shift, and my thoughts about what had possibly gone on effed with me. It was pretty clear I did not have the balls to be a dispatcher. Been an elementary school teacher for almost 10 years now, and I still think about it. Kudos to those who could hack it. Hey, I was going to be a teacher and realized I couldn't handle that, so you're still a step above me. But seriously, I can never blame anyone for not being able to handle that kind of job. It takes a certain kind of strength to handle what they do. I absolutely feel for the operator who took the call the day my stepdad killed himself. I was only 12 at the time and my mother was a basket case. I do remember how calm the operator was, asking about my little brother and friend who I had hidden upstairs, and the police who arrived just as it happened in the garage. We tried to stop him for a while. Later, the chief of police, who was the first on the scene, came to visit us and checked on us until we moved. He later died in the line of duty. I have a deep respect for 911 operators and first responders. For them to have to deal with that and the family who is probably losing their minds, I send them good vibes always. It doesn't scare me, but at the time I panicked like hell. Being a dispatcher is exactly what you think it's like, but also nothing like you'd expect all at the same time. The scariest call I ever took was a 12-year-old self-termination, but the age or nature of the call wasn't what messed with me. It was that when the call came in, I spoke to the teen brother who started the call, saying he and his parents couldn't find his sister that morning, and so I started putting in a call for a runaway child. As I'm getting the details and description, I hear yelling in the background calling out for this girl, and I'm like, "What's that?" And he's like, "Oh, that's my parents." But it didn't sound like they were calling out for her. It sounded pained, and it had turned out she hung herself in the jungle gym swing set in their yard. Now, I've taken calls for successful self-terminations, domestic violence, spoken to mentally ill people telling me they want to die, even a child calling about their mother making funny sounds and not responding. But this call just came out of left field because mentally I was prepared for a runaway child, and then he dropped the bomb on me and just started saying, "She's dead, oh my god, she's dead." And you just have to deal with it as best you can and make split decisions on a dime. Not scared, but I will always remember this incident, just as well as I remember where I was on 9/11. To be clear, they are not related, but I remember both with the same crystal mind-scarring clarity. I worked the Dinya Farmer shooting in Phoenix, Arizona. She's got her own subreddit here somewhere. It's an unsolved case still. Anyway, I remember the call as she was reporting being followed by some dudes in a generic white pickup. They were being pretty aggressive towards her on the highway. She was fairly even-tempered and well-worded during the call, but clearly scared, and the last words she said to me were, "They're pulling up alongside me, what should I do?" I did not have the chance to answer her. And despite what Hollywood and/or TV want to tell you, gunshots are not even close to the same over a phone, especially a cell phone. Because, if I recall correctly, they have high-band and low-band passive filters that significantly reduce loud noises. Anyway, I heard 3 distinctive pops, like someone smacking 2 hardcover books together pretty hard, and then I heard what sounded like phone dropping noises. I did not believe they were gunshots. I didn't know about that sound redux at all, so I thought maybe she just dropped her phone and I was hearing her fumbling to pick it up while driving. It wasn't until our 911 boards lit up with reports of shots fired and I refreshed her emergency 911 GPS coordinates that I made the correlation. Turns out one of the shots instantly killed her. There was no screaming, no moaning, no blood-curdling shrill. It was just 3 pops, a dropped phone, and then uncontrolled car rolling to a stop on the highway. I was in shock. I thought I was okay, but my coworkers encouraged me to take a break anyway, and I did. It took several long minutes for my mind to process what I had just witnessed via telephone, and it set in like a cold, dark hand grabbing me around my entire body. Not crushing it, just encompassing me. And I got the cold sweats and began to second-guess everything I did during that call. You are your own worst critic in this job, for those that actually do it with care and want to do right by others. Anyway, after I came back from break, I was rather timid the remainder of the night and withdrawn. Others would say that is not my typical demeanor, as I'm usually a classic Type A personality, outgoing, boisterous, and quick to make decisions. I was rocked to my core. That was the first time I'd ever heard someone die on the line while speaking to me. I was the last person on Earth they'd ever spoken to, and it bothered me. It still bothers me. More so with the fact that her killers are still out there, effing off and thinking they've gotten away with murder. Turns out she was a frequent customer at the same corner store I would visit every weekend. Our paths never crossed directly, but the owner Mike, or Mike's Corner Store, now sold/closed at 19th Street and Indian School, knew her well. That's how I found out she frequented the place. Anyway, this is all kinda jumbled and tangential, sorry. When I took on an abused kid for therapy for various reasons, ended up listening to the 999 call their mom made. Long story short, mom walks in to see the kid getting abused by the babysitter. Mom went mental and beat them unconscious in front of the child. Mom rings 999 and gives us the full story she knows from the second she walked in. Hasn't asked the child any questions until police are present. Because I can't guarantee I won't pick up the butcher's knife in the chopping block next to me and just hack them to bits and hide their body. Said that in the 911 call, calm as day. The entire call was really eerie with how calm Mom was, but you could hear the love she has for her child and her acceptance of whatever consequences were coming her way. It wasn't so much pride in her voice, but it was a tone of, I don't care what happens to me, I saved and protected my child after failing them. Come what may, I did my best by her and I'd do it again. Altogether, it was a 15-minute call before police showed up, and the babysitter woke up about minute 7, and that's when crap got, well, all you hear is her saying, right, you're going to want to tell the officers to step on it as XXX is coming around and you can F right off if you think I'm letting them out of this house, other than with a police escort. Frantic typing for dispatcher, trying to keep the situation calm when the babysitter freaks the hell out, screaming, swearing, threatening mom, and suddenly you hear the mom struggling to breathe. It was obvious she was getting strangled when suddenly the babysitter screams, then all goes silent except for gargling. The kid had snuck back into the kitchen where they were at the sound of the screaming, saw the babysitter strangling mom, so grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed the babysitter, can't remember where. And at that moment, they let go of Mum's neck, so Mum grabbed a knife and slit the babysitter's throat. The phone call got Mum off of all charges on self-defense. I've heard a few dispatch calls in my line of work, which is unusual for therapists, but due to the cases I take on, there have been a handful that it was deemed by the family the calls were relevant for therapy. But yeah, me and the dispatcher happened to know each other through our kids' school, and I said to them after I heard it if they wanted a few free sessions. I had time and was hoping to sit with them due to how horrific the call was, and we became friends instead. I know this still occasionally gives them nightmares to this day, and we're talking a few years now, and to be honest, it does me too sometimes. I'm glad that story has at least a sort of happy ending with the mother and kid living, but my God, can you even imagine having to live through something like that, especially to be that poor kid? There is no amount of therapy that could make that completely okay. Woman called because she and her husband were arguing at dinner. Children screaming because of arguing. Hear a door close and a loud gunshot goes off. Shot himself in the other room. The kid opened the door first, then wife screaming at me what to do. Told her to start CPR, but she told me his brains were falling out of his head. Turned out to be my buddy's cousin. Had to walk outside and smoke a cigarette, probably one of my tougher calls. Another one, a mom, called because her young son, like 5 or 6, got stung by a bee. She didn't have his EpiPen, and it was fair season, so a lot of traffic to get in and out. He didn't make it. Stayed with her until they got there. I did a bit of 911, but this call came from when I worked for God's Special People. Guy kidnapped his pregnant girlfriend and drove way out into the woods near Washington, Georgia. We get a call from the county that they're chasing him. Troopers get involved. He drives deeper into the woods onto some logging roads at 70+ miles per hour. And if you know logging roads that far out, they're not meant for passenger cars, let alone at that speed. The guy kicks his girlfriend out of the car at 70 miles per hour to try and get the troopers off his tail. Some stop, others continue the chase. The guy ducks off into another trail and loses the troopers for a bit. They're searching for him on foot. We're trying to get status updates because they're so far out we're losing radio contact, and all we're getting is bits and pieces of gunshots in the woods and people screaming. We don't know if he's dead or if our guys are dead, if the girl is dead. Nothing for about 20 minutes. It wasn't so much as being scared as it was a different feeling of almost helplessness. You don't know what to do or who to call when everyone you would usually call is already on the scene. This happened about 10 years ago, and I still hear it. My dad was a firefighter for 25 years and still works in the industry to this day. When I was a baby, like 2 months old, my dad went on a fishing trip, and while he was gone, my mom got me sleeping in my own room. She was so proud of herself and me, and so was my dad when he got home. The week that he went back to work, he had 3 SIDS calls in 3 days. After that hitch, he came home and took me out of my crib and insisted on me sleeping on his chest because he wouldn't be able to sleep unless he could feel my heart beating. Honestly, sleeping on him was probably less safe than sleeping in my crib, but I was okay and I ended up sleeping in my parents' bed until I was like 9 after that, lol. I don't have kids, but I can't imagine being a parent and working in a field where I might be confronted by something like that. I don't think I could do it, but I'm thankful for the people who do. Working overtime on New Year's Eve into New Year's a couple of years ago, I'm down to my last 15 minutes. Phone rings and I think, this should kill that time and be my last for night. It starts off relatively tame, just a bouncer at a bar calling about a guy they kicked out but not actively causing issues. Then mid-sentence, at exactly 1:52 hours, 3 shots one after the other, then screaming and panic. I frantically type in the address and shots fired as I mute my mic to call out for the rest to prepare. Unmuted, I tell the guy to take cover and tell me what he can safely see, any wounded, the shooter, anything. I assure my caller help is on the way, then let him go after confirming the shots have stopped so I can call EMS. 20 or so frantic callers, and 30 minutes later, I went home on an adrenaline rush. I woke up the next morning reliving the call, hearing those 3 shots over and over, and start to get anxious and can't focus at work. Then a coworker plays a video of a Snapchat someone got of the shooting in the background, and I nearly broke down. I don't blame them. I hadn't mentioned the trouble I was having, and they weren't on shift at the time. They didn't know I took the call. Took some time, but I've moved past it now, but I'll never forget hearing 2 people get murdered back to back over the phone. I hope the caller didn't have it rough, poor guy. Eeriest, frequent caller with known mental health issues. She normally rants about conspiracies, someone bugging her phone, government, blah blah blah. That night she was totally calm and said that she had to set herself on fire to burn out the demons. She was weirdly calm and matter-of-fact about everything. Officers show up first, everyone thinking it's just another one of her mental breaks, and I find her somehow walking towards them, her entire body covered in severe burns, her face practically melted away. She has doused herself in gasoline, drawn a pentagram on the ground, lit the 5 corners on fire, and herself on fire in the middle. She lived at least long enough to make it to the hospital. Eerie as F. Haunting. I took a call on the non-emergency line, so no way to get a GPS location. The female caller was hysterical, gave me an address, and said she needed help. I started to ask questions, but there was an unmistakable pop, 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 and the line went dead. The address she gave didn't come back to a good location, and it was not in our jurisdiction. I gave everything over to the county, and they searched everywhere but couldn't find anything. They couldn't even ping the phone, as it was apparently a Wi-Fi number. So I still have no idea if it was a prank or if someone actually got shot somewhere. Scary/sad. 12-year-old girl calls freaking out. She can't remember her address. I was able to find it, and says she is locked in the bathroom with her mother, who had just been stabbed in the neck by her uncle. I talked to the mom as well, and was getting info when the line cut. Fearing the worst, I tried calling and calling and calling back with no luck. Finally, on the 7th callback, she picks up. Her voice had dropped an octave, and I could hear the blood gurgling in her throat. She told me goodbye and that she was dying. She was able to get out of the house just as the cops showed up and thankfully lived, but man, it was horrifying. I found out later that the call dropped because the mom called her twin sister and left her a message to the effect of, "I'm dying, I love you, goodbye." That is incredibly sad, but also I think I would try to do the same thing. If I truly thought I was dying and that 911 wouldn't be able to help, I would try to call my partner and family to say goodbye. Just thinking about that, though, is a little much. I'm gonna make this one short. My brother told me this over a beer a few days ago. He worked as a 112 operator in Poland in the 2000s. He was working the night shift when a call came in. On the other end, people were screaming and shouting. Before the call ended, someone started screaming, "We're going down, hold on to something." Later, it turned out that a family of 4 took a night flight over a remote part of the coast. At some point during it, the engine caught fire, and they crashed straight into the sea a couple of miles offshore. The entire thing got little media coverage, a few little articles in local newspapers. The call ended right as the plane hit the water at almost 90 degrees. Everyone on board died. After that and a couple of family issues, mainly our father's death, he quit. Now he's a carpenter and owns a small woodworking shop.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.